Okay, good evening. I want to talk at a very interesting Iyun on Daf Mem Aleph Amud Beis regarding Hilchos Mikvah. We learned on Mem Aleph Amud Beis one of the fundamental differences between rainwater and spring water. Rainwater is only metaher if it's stationary, be'ashboiren. Spring water is even metaher bezoichlen if it's flowing. But we never explain why. What's the reason for that? Why is spring water metaher when it's flowing and rainwater metaher only when it's stationary? And if spring water is metaher when it's flowing, why don't we learn out rainwater from spring water? We're going to have a number of nafkaminas, because if rainwater is only metaher when it's stationary, our mikvahs are rainwater, and presumably our mikvahs are stationary. However, if there's a crack in the wall and water goes in and out, is that stationary? Or if there's a filter and the water goes into the filter and back into the mikvah, is that considered stationary? So, first I want to bring to your attention the Ran. We'll have to do this a little abridged. The Ran says on the Gemara, Amar Abin, Amarav, Mitra b'marava sada rabba paras. The Ran says, this is on Daf Mem Amud Aleph. The Ran says, Kishiyard Matar Eretz Yisrael, I'm going to paraphrase, when rain falls in Eretz Yisrael, the testimony is Euphrates River in Bavel. Because if the Euphrates gets bigger, we know that even though it didn't rain in Bavel, it must have rained in Eretz Yisrael. The nafkamina would be, you're now to be toivel in the Euphrates River, because since it's rainwater is not metaher bezoichlen if it's flowing, ela ba'ashboiren, only when it's stationary. Koloimar, dekavu v'kaimi. Ashboiren means gathered and standing, like we learned in the Sifri. The Sifri says, if a mayan is metaher flowing, I would think even a mikvah is metaher flowing. Why don't we learn out one from another? Why don't we say just like a spring is metaher flowing, a mikvah is metaher flowing? Therefore it says, ach mayan ubar. Mayan is metaher b'zoichlen, mikvah is only metaher ba'ashboiren. Therefore, anytime there's a chash, maybe it's mostly rainwater, then the natural flowing water, it's aser. But that's only if the river is very big. But if it's going at its regular pace, or it only increased a little bit, there's no chash that it's rabu noidfim al ha zoichlin, then it's kosher. Okay? Based on this, the Rambam paskins. Let me tell you where the Rambam is. I could show you the words, but I want you to know where it is. The Rambam is in Hilchos Mikvah, Parak Tes Halacha Ches. The Rambam says, Ma bin mayan lemikvah. What's the difference between a mayan and a mikvah? Ha mikvah ina matar el b'mem sa. Mikvah is only matar with 40 sa. V'ha mayan matar b'choshu. A spring, even a tiny bit is matar you. Again, provided that you could get your whole entity into the water. But if you can, even if it would be one droplet, if you could condense yourself to fit into one droplet, it would be matahar. Ha-mikvah ina matar ela ba'ashboiren, v'ha-mayim ha-nizchala mimenu einon mataran. A mikvah is not matahar only if it's stationary. Whatever water flows from it is not matahar. And a spring is matahar with flowing water. Now, is there any connection between these two halachas? That a mayan is mataher b'kol shehu, and a mayan is mataher b'zoichlen. I'm going to let the cat out of the hat. The simple reason why a spring is mataher even by flowing water, and a mikvah is mataher only in stationary water, is because that is what is typical. Typically, natural water moves. Typically, rainwater is stationary. So the Torah gave these types of waters for them to be effective in their regular condition. However, there's a chiddush of the Rivash has an amazing chiddush. The Rivash says the reason why a mikvah cannot be mataher if it's flowing, because once water is flowing, it's not connected one drop to another. It's no longer connected. So if it's not connected, you don't have 40 sa. So therefore a mikvah that's flowing, even if it has 100 sa, is puzzle, because once it's on the move, it's what we call a kataferus. It's called a waterfall. If it's a waterfall, you don't have, the water is not unified anymore. But a spring Even though taka, if it's moving, it's not unified, it's okay, because a mayan is matar b'choshu. You don't need 40 sa. Meaning, zoichelin, flowing water, makes it that the water is not connected. If it's not connected, you don't have 40 sa. A mikvah needs 40 sa. A mayan does not need 40 sa. Okay? That's the rivash. By the way, another difference between a mikvah and a mayan is a mikvah only works for a nida or a keri. It doesn't work for a zav. A mayan works for a zav. One of the reasons we don't go to the harabayas today is a zav cannot go to a harabayas, and we're choishesh. We don't know. We don't know for sure. We have to be concerned. Maybe l'chumra we're a zav, and therefore you would need a mayan to be matahar. That's one of the reasons. Okay, let's see the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch says in Sivin Reish Aleph, May mayan matarin af bezoichlin. Spring water is matar even if it's flowing. Zoichlin is nimshachim v'holchim ein mechunasim. Zoichlin means flowing. May geshamim, rainwater ein matarin elabash bayren, is only matar if it's stationary. Perush makom amok, if it's deep. Shemiskansim bayamim, that the water gathers. V'nikra ash bayren, it's called stationary. Haga aval al yedei zechila psulin minat Torah imheim l'chud b'lay mayan. Rainwater, if it's flowing, is pasal midaraisa. Says the Lavush. Why? The Lavush says, Kvar yadata the stam mayan darkoi bezechila. We know stam spring, it's typical for it to be flowing. V'stam bar, and a stam bar, mikveh mayim. A stam bar is a gathering of water. Perushem mechunasim va'imdim. They're gathered and standing. Beinam zechel, they're not flowing. Ke'inyan shenemar yikavu hamayim al makam echad. Lafikach may mayan metuharem. Therefore, the water of a spring is tahar, even when af kashem zoichlin, even when it's flowing. V'koshikein kashem mechunasim, and certainly when it's gathered. So therefore, a spring is metaher even when it's flowing, certainly when it's gathered, as long as you could get your whole body into it. Because if it's flowing, it's still called a mayan. The Lavush says, "Shekain derech harbe mayan hashiam d'makam echad." Also, if it's standing in one place, it's good, because sometimes even a mayan could be gathered into one place. But a mikvah is only matar ba'ashvoiren. Why? Kedarkan, like its usual practice, v'loy bezechina. Meaning, the Lavush is saying, the reason why a mayan is metaher bezoichlin is because it's the derech of a mayan to be flowing. The reason why a mikveh is only metaher be'ashboiren, stationary, is because that is their derech. Their derech is to be stationary. That's the logic of these halachos. The Aruch HaShulchan says the same. He says, "V'halacha psuki hi b'chol hashas d'mayin metar af bezoichlin." It is well known throughout Shas that a mayin is matar even if it's flowing. Kolamer shamayim nizchalim v'nimshachim, the water flows. Aval hamikva rak b'ashborin kolamer nikavim v'oimdim b'makam echad v'lo yishiyu nizchalim v'nimshachim. L'cheim. Says Aruch HaShulchan, therefore, im yesh sedakim b'defanes hamikva, if you got a crack in the walls of the mikvah, shamayim nizchalim psula hamikva. If a mikvah has a crack in the walls, it's pasul. Why? Like it will be explained. Why, if it has a crack, is it pasul? Because it's flowing then. That's why you have to be very careful. The walls of a mikvah don't have a crack. Because if it has a crack and it seeps out, it is flowing. Okay, that's the Aruch HaShulchan points out this halacha, a crack in the mikvah, pasels the mikvah. Now we're going to see the amazing chiddush of the Rivash quoted by the Stipler. The Rivash wants to say, the logic is not like the Lavush and the Aruch HaShulchan, that the reason why you could use flowing water for a mayan, but only stationary water for rainwater is because, don't say it's because it's the derech of spring water to flow and it's the derech of rainwater to be gathered. It's more fundamental than that. Anytime water is flowing, it can't be considered a unified amount. And therefore, you don't have 40 sa. Anytime water is flowing, you can't consider it one body of water. So by rainwater, it's a problem, you don't have 40 sa. By a mayan, since a mayan is matayr b'kol shehu, even though you don't have 40 sa, it's okay. You don't need 40 sa by a mayan. Says the Rivash, Kasa Rivash Zal Shana B'Sim Reitzai Beis Al Mashkas Rambam. The Rivash says, look, Ubir HaRivash Hatam Mishum Dechol Zoichlim Hava Katafaras. Katafaras means a waterfall. Anytime water is flowing, it's like a waterfall. V'kaimalon Dahanitzoik V'Katafaras Einoi Chibor. We hold that a connected flow or a waterfall is not attached. Says the Gra, Al Pizem is bar had the mikvah in a matar bezoichen. Now we understand why a mikvah is not matar if it's flowing. Umayin matar bezoichen. V'humisham the mikvah had tzricha shir abam sa. Mikvah needs 40 sa. V'kiman the zoichlem ena mechabrim. Since flowing water is not considered connected, leka tziruf memsa. You don't have a tziruf of 40 sa. But by a mayan, it's metaher. You don't have 40 sa. You don't need 40 sa. Aval mayan shapir metaher bezoichlen. Kiven ein sarch shir the mayan metaher bekoshu. Ve'afal pi she'en la mayim taras chibor. Even though the truth is, in this spring, it's not considered connected. Kishehin nischalim mikamagam kol mashehu shaboy metaher. Every little droplet is metaher. Okay. So now the question we already dealt with, if there's a crack in the mikvah's pasul because the water's flowing. And it's rainwater. What if you use a filter? How does a filter work? I think the way it works is the water goes into the filter and then it comes back into the body of water. I think that's how it works. It's not like the filter is sitting there and it's filtering with the water while the water is there. No, the water is going into the filter and it's coming out of the filter. The Ramah says something interesting, quoting the Rivash, and I'll tell you the truth, I don't fully understand if this is connected to this other Rivash that we just learned. He says, when water goes out of a mikvah, it's not called flowing, that's only if it doesn't go back into the mikvah. The Ramah says in Siman Reish Aleph Sif Nun. If it goes out a little bit, and it comes back, that's not called flowing. That's not called flowing. So I honestly, I'm not clear if this is taloi on the Rivash. The Mar Mekoimis that I have here say somehow this is dependent on the Rivash. I don't know why this comment of the Ramah is in any way connected to the Rivash. That's the Ramah's psak. Water that goes out and returns is not called zoichlen. Based on this Ramah, Rav Moshe says the following chiddush, that if you have a filter in your mikvah, it's kosher. Well, he says, Rav Moshe, this is an Igrois Moshe, Yoredeya, Simin Kuf Yud. It's Chelek Aleph Siman Kuf Yud. Umitzad Zechila Yoser Noiter She'en Kan Psul. Rav Moshe says he's inclined to say that al Zechila there's no psul. Kivan debayim laha filter v'choizrim l'makaymam. It goes into the filter and it goes back to its place. K'de'isa b'ramah simen nun meharivash seif nun meharivash. And then the Rav Moshe says when it goes out a little bit and it's choizer, it's not called zechila. Does the Ramah only mean if it's a little bit? Why does the Ramah say the word a little bit? Does he mean only a little bit, but a lot? If a lot goes out and comes back, it would be a problem. Says Rav Moshe, nira de lav dafka. In my opinion, that word is lav dafka. Lav dafka ma'at. V'loy matzasi loy b'rivash v'loy b'darkei Moshe lashon ma'at. I didn't see in the original source or where the Darkei Moshe brings this down the word ma'at. V'lachein haya kosher la'machshirin nasan v'nata b'shuven. Therefore, it should be kosher if you have a filter. But I'm still not 100% sure. Maybe ma'at is dafka. Rabbi Moshe says it's best to turn off a filter in a mikvah while it's being used. Anyway, the main thing I wanted to bring out from here is this very interesting chiddush of the Rivash, that the reason why zechila does not work by a mikvah is because if it's flowing, the water is not connected, and we can't consider that you have 40 sa. So how does a mayan work if it flows? The answer is a mayan is mataher b'chol shehu. So therefore, even if it's not connected, it's still good because you don't need 40 sa. That's the chiddush of the Rivash, as opposed to the simple way to learn, the way the Levush and the Aruch HaShulchan learns that it's typical for a mayan to be on the move. It's typical for rainwater to be stationary. Okay, that is the Iyun chair. Okay.